Hi everyone, it's Michelle here. Welcome back to Grounded Haven Homestead. In today's video, I'm going to be doing another week of pantry challenge meals. In my last one, I did a whole week of dinners that we had, so I thought it would be nice to switch it up this time, and I'll be showing you a bunch of breakfasts and snacks that we had throughout the week using what was in our pantry. And first, I'm going to start off by showing you what I pulled out of my pantry as ingredients that I wanted to use up. Here are the things that I pulled out from the pantry to use this week. First, we have a dozen eggs. Our chickens are laying a lot of eggs right now, and we have a nice supply to be working with. So I'm going to cook these up into one of my favorite snacks, which is tea eggs. Then I went into our freezer, and I have this bag of frozen cranberries, and we're going to be making an orange cranberry loaf with that. I have some frozen strawberries from our garden last year, and I still have like 4 or 5 bags of these, and spring is right around the corner and we're probably going to get more strawberries this year, so I want to use those up. Then I have a couple of containers of our Wintermelon. This is from the one that we just cut up in a recent video where we cut into our 30-pound Wintermelon, and I froze a bunch of it up, so I brought out 2 containers and we're going to be making a Wintermelon tea. And then I also have this really sad looking apple. This was in our fridge and you can tell it's really wrinkly. We don't want to eat that fresh, but this is going to be good for some oatmeal for the week. So those are all the things that I specifically pulled out that I want to get through. But of course we're going to be pulling from our other ingredients from our pantry, and the goal is to use everything from our pantry and not have to get anything from the store. But besides that, my main goal really is to just get through some of the stuff we either have an excess of, like eggs, or just stuff that's a little bit older in our freezer or fridge that I want to get through and make space for the next year. Jumping right into our first meal, we're going to be making some waffles. This is going to be a yeasted waffle batter, which is my favorite kind, and it also uses sourdough discard, which is great because we always have sourdough discard on hand. But honestly, it's one that I like so much that I will feed my starter just to make, even if I'm not baking bread, because it is so good, and we probably have this more often than I make sourdough. So it's just a great way to put that starter to use. I'll link the recipe that I use down below. This recipe starts off by making an overnight sponge, which I'm doing here. So this is the night before we're gonna have our waffles. And you mix up about half the ingredients. So you have flour, your sourdough, starter discard, some buttermilk, and also a couple of tablespoons of sugar. And we're just gonna mix that up, and it's gonna sit on the counter overnight until tomorrow morning when we put together the rest of the ingredients. This is one reason I really like this recipe, because I can do half of the work the night before, and then the next morning everything comes together really quickly. The recipe calls for 2 cups of all-purpose flour. I'm using 1 cup all-purpose and 1 cup of whole wheat pastry flour just because I had it because I ordered it from Azure. These waffles are already really light as it is, but the pastry flour does add a little extra lightness to them and also a little bit of extra flavor and nuttiness since it is whole wheat flour. So now it's the next morning, and before I get into finishing off that waffle batter, I'm going to be making one of my new favorite things, a strawberry whipped cream. So I have about a 1/4 cup of strawberries that were frozen, and I just left them in the fridge overnight to defrost and get all soft. And instead of pureeing this in my blender, I'm just going to be using my stand mixer with the whisk attachment to just whisk this until it's nicely pureed. This way I don't have to dirty up my blender because I'm going to be using my stand mixer anyway to finish off this whipped cream. I'm adding some powdered sugar, maybe like a few tablespoons or a 1/4 cup, and then about half a cup of heavy whipping cream. I'm also going to add a splash of vanilla and a pinch of salt. And we're just going to whip this up until it becomes a really nice stiff whipped cream. I made this as a topping for cupcakes recently, but I liked it so much that now we are just having it on everything. It is such a nice way to use up our frozen strawberries. It is seriously so good. I don't even like normal whipped cream, but this strawberry whipped cream I could just eat spoonfuls of. And it's so beautiful and pink with that color from the strawberries as well. Alright, so now it's time to finish off that waffle batter. You can see the next day that overnight sponge has gotten really puffy and kind of foamy, so you can tell that the starter has done its job and created a lot of lift in that batter. We're also going to be adding a little bit of baking soda, and then we're going to also add a little bit of melted butter. You can also use melted coconut oil, and then I'm going to throw in a couple of eggs as well. So we're just going to mix this all up until it's nice and smooth. And you might notice that there's no extra sugar in this batter. The 2 tablespoons that we added in the overnight sponge is all there is in the whole batter, which is really great because it's a very low sugar recipe. I mean, we are going to be putting whipped cream and maple syrup on this, so it's nice that at least the base is a little bit healthier and lower in sugar. And I'm going to keep this batter pretty plain this time, so I'm just going to put it right into our waffle iron as is. If I didn't have the strawberry whipped cream, sometimes some things I like to add are some cinnamon, and my favorite waffles are actually blueberry waffles. But we don't have blueberry bushes that are producing a lot on our property. They're still really young. So every summer we go and pick blueberries at a local farm, but I love frozen blueberries so much that those usually only last us like a month or two. And now that I found out such a good way to use our frozen strawberries, which we can grow really well here, it's a nice way to be able to use the fruit that we actually do grow on our property rather than having to depend on outsourcing it elsewhere. And we have plenty of frozen strawberries in our freezer, so I'm going to be making the strawberry whipped cream to go with our waffles many more times. Here's a close-up of what the texture looks like. You can see how fluffy and airy it is inside. That's because this is a yeasted waffle, and that's why I think that they are the best. You just have all of those pockets of air in there that make this the fluffiest waffle ever. So now it's just time to eat. We're gonna put all the fixings on it, butter, maple syrup, and of course our delicious whipped cream, and just dig in. It's of course really good fresh the first day, but actually these waffles are a really good snack for the following days as well. This recipe makes probably 10 to 12 waffles, and we usually, eat several the first day, but then we have plenty left over because we only have 2 people in our house. And for the leftover waffles, I'll just keep them at room temperature, and after they sit for a while, they'll get a little bit soft. So the outside won't be as crunchy, but they're really good even just room temperature. These also toast up really well, so if you put them in a toaster, the outside gets really nice and toasty and crunchy, but the inside still stays really light and fluffy. They are so good. A lot of times I'll just toast these up and eat it without any butter or maple syrup. Just eat it plain and it's amazing. And I don't have to feel too bad about it either because I'm not slathering it in syrup or sugar. I believe you can also use this batter to make pancakes, but I mean, why would you when you can make waffles? Next, I'm going to be making some tea eggs, which are a favorite of mine. They are a very common street food in China and are eaten a lot for breakfast as well. I'm going to start by making a marinating liquid. Into a pot, I'm adding 2.5 cups of water. And then we're going to add some nice warm spices to add a lot of savory flavor. I have a few bay leaves, 1 star anise, a cinnamon stick that I'm going to break into pieces, and then I also have a teaspoon or so of Sichuan peppercorns. If you can't find these, you can probably leave those out, but I wouldn't leave out the other spices. I also have a couple of black tea bags that I'm going to set aside for now. We're going to add those in later. To this, I'm also going to add 4 tablespoons of light soy sauce and 2 tablespoons of dark soy sauce. The light soy sauce adds nice saltiness and the dark soy sauce adds a really good color. That's going to be pretty important for our tea eggs. We're also going to add a little bit of sugar to add sweetness and to balance out that soy sauce, and then a little bit of salt. So that's our mixture for right now. We're going to bring it to a boil on the stove. Once it's boiling, I can add in those tea bags, and then I can take this off the heat, and then I'm just going to let this steep and cool down completely. While that's steeping, I'm going to boil my eggs. So I have another pot going with water in it, and I'm going to add in my eggs. And I like to medium or soft boil my eggs, so I'm boiling these for about 8 minutes. And you probably want to go a little bit more on the softer boil side for these because they will cure a little bit in that mixture, which I'll show you later. After they are done boiling and have cooled down, I'm gonna start cracking these eggs, and we're not going to peel them. You're gonna just like crack them all around and leave them just like that and put them in your container. This is essential for a classic tea egg look, because all those cracks allow for our marinating mixture to seep into the tea eggs and really flavor them nicely with those warm spices and the soy sauce and the tea fragrance. And it's gonna make a really beautiful like spiderweb crackly pattern. And yeah, I'm just gonna get cracking. When I filled up my container, I'm going to take my marinating liquid, which is now cooled down, and strain it out into my container, trying to cover the eggs as much as possible so that they can really sit in that liquid. And then these are going to sit for at least a day and up to a week. The longer they sit, the stronger the flavor will be. So you definitely want to wait at least one full day before you dig into these. So I'm just going to finish off the rest of the eggs, and these are going to go in the fridge. This is a great way to use up all those eggs that we're getting right now. We're getting like 5 to 7 eggs a day. It's nice to be able to cook up like a dozen or 2 eggs and make a big batch of these. I could eat so many of these in one sitting. They are so good. They're salty, a little bit sweet. They're fragrant from those tea leaves and have those warming spices in there too. After these have been sitting for a day, I can go ahead and peel these eggs and try them out. These have got to be like the most beautiful kinds of eggs. They've taken on some of that dark color from that dark soy sauce and also the tea. And you can see how it has sort of like a crackly look to it from where the marinating liquid was able to seep in where we've cracked those eggshells. And it just makes the most beautiful marbled effect. By the way, when you're done eating your eggs, you can reuse that marinating liquid. Just bring it back up to a boil and let it cool down again, and then you can pour it over a fresh batch of eggs and you can reuse it several more times. These are really good to eat as is, but they're also really good as a topping for rice dishes, and that marinating liquid also is really good to put over rice. These also make for really good ramen eggs or as a topper for any kind of noodle dish. And you can see as I cut into it, it is perfectly jammy inside from soft boiling those eggs. But as these sit in that marinating liquid, if you come back after a few days, the salt and the sugar in there is going to start to cure those yolks. So this is after like 3 or 4 days, and you can see the texture of that yolk has kind of changed and gotten like really jammy, and it is just so good. For my next recipe, I'm making some wintermelon based drinks because we always like to have a little bit of like a tea or sweet drink in the afternoon as a little pick-me-up. I have 2 quarts of wintermelon that were in our freezer. And since they were frozen previously, after they've been defrosted, they released a lot of liquid, which is actually good for this recipe. And I'm also adding a little bit of fresh wintermelon that I had in the fridge as well, just because I already had it and wanted to use it up. To this, I'm going to add brown sugar. I believe the proportions for this are like 5 to 6 parts wintermelon and 1 part brown sugar. And I'm going to add that brown sugar and just let it sit in this wintermelon for about an hour. And this sugar is basically macerating the wintermelon. It's going to help it to release more of its liquid before we go to boil it. And after this has been sitting for an hour, we're going to boil it on the stove until the wintermelon is completely soft and has released a lot of its flavor and liquid into this mixture. What we're making here is a wintermelon simple syrup, and we don't want any of those solids in our drink, so we're going to strain these out in a cheesecloth lined sieve. Just squeeze out all of that pulp so that we can get as much of that infused syrup as possible. And this is going to make a concentrated syrup, so you can see what's left in that bowl down there. And using this syrup, we can dilute it with tea or water to make a really nice, refreshing drink. And by the way, that pulp that we're squeezing the liquid out of doesn't have to go to waste. You can still use this. It has a really nice light flavor, but it is very sweet as well because it has a lot of that brown sugar in it. So it's almost like a jam, and the texture is really soft and creamy. So you can spread this on top of toast, or you can mix it into yogurt or puree it into smoothies. So you definitely don't have to throw that out, and every part of this is going to get put to use. After we're done squeezing out all of the liquid, we have our finished Wintermelon syrup. I ended up with 3/4 of a quart of this concentrate, but since it's going to be diluted to make our drinks, this will make about 3 quarts of drinks. And to make our drinks, we're going to do 1 part of our Wintermelon syrup and 4 to 5 parts of liquid, depending on how sweet you like it. You can use plain hot water, or what we really like to do also is to brew some jasmine tea and to add it to that. And the fragrance of the jasmine tea goes really well with the Wintermelon. And you can drink it just as is, or if you want, you can add things like herbal jelly, or you can add tapioca pearls and some milk to make it into a Wintermelon milk bubble tea. This is a drink that you can have hot or cold as well. We're going to be having this warm since it's winter, but I know that this is a pretty popular drink to have iced in the summer. It has a really nice light flavor, and it's sweet, of course, because it has brown sugar in there. And it is a nice treat, but it does also have some of those nutritional benefits of the Wintermelon as well. Once you make that syrup, there are a lot of possibilities for how you can enjoy it. And I know this is a drink rather than like a solid snack, but if you add grass jelly or tapioca pearls, it's actually quite filling, and it's something that we like to have a lot in the afternoon, to have something a little bit fun in the middle of the day. Moving on to our next meal, I'm going to be making a cranberry orange loaf using those frozen cranberries that were in my freezer. So into a bowl, I have some brown sugar and white sugar, and I'm adding an egg, and I'm just going to add the rest of my liquid ingredients to this. I also have melted coconut oil and also some buttermilk. And this is not my recipe, so I will leave a link to it in the description box. I'm going to be adding in the zest of 1 orange. This is going to add so much orange flavor, and we're going to double up on the orange flavor later on with a little icing for our loaf. We always have lots of oranges in our house in the winter, so this is a really nice pairing to go with the cranberries. I'm going to add in my frozen cranberries just as is. No need to defrost them or anything like that. And then when everything's all nicely mixed up, I'm going to transfer this into my loaf tin, which I have lined with a parchment sling so that it's really easy to remove later on. And I ended up baking this for longer than the recipe said. I think it ended up being like 70 minutes. And I did have to tent it with foil after a little bit because it was starting to get a little bit dark, but this is what the finished loaf looks like. I've let it cool down completely because I'm going to be making an icing for this, and I don't want it to melt. I have a couple of tablespoons of orange juice, which I squeezed out of that orange that we zested for the recipe, and I'm going to add some powdered sugar to this until it makes a really nice thick glaze. I like it when icing falls over the sides of loaves really dramatically, and to do this, the glaze always has to be thicker than you think it's supposed to be, and you can just keep adding powdered sugar until it's a nice consistency. This icing not only adds sweetness, but it actually packs a lot of the orange flavor in there. If you remember, we have the orange zest in the bread, and that does add a lot of flavor, but it's a very different kind of flavor having like cooked orange in there and then having that fresh bright juice. And if we had tried to put this juice in the bread, it would have cooked out, and you don't get that same brightness as you do by having it uncooked in the icing. And it's really nice to just layer those different orange flavors by having both the zest in the bread and the juice in the icing. And here comes that beautiful icing pour. Make sure your loaf is completely cool before you attempt this, because if I've learned a single thing from the Great British Baking Show, it's that trying to ice something while it's still warm is a disaster. It will melt and absorb in and become more of a glaze, which is not the look we're going for. And the second thing I've learned is that British people have an interesting vocabulary. I let that sit for a little bit for the icing to kind of like harden a little bit, and then I can cut into it. And it just looks really beautiful with those cranberries inside. I love the combination of oranges and cranberries. There's something about it that's just so good, and it's actually quite a festive loaf as well. Like, I feel like this would be a really good Christmas loaf. And it's just a great one for the winter because oranges are in season, and then if you have leftover cranberries from Thanksgiving, this is a really good recipe to be able to use them up. This bread has quite a bit of sugar in it because you really do need that sweetness to balance out the tartness of the cranberries, but because of that, we usually don't have this for breakfast. It's more of an afternoon snack that we can have with some tea, or we even have it as like a late night dessert. And Aaron said that it was probably one of the best quick breads that I've made, so definitely seal of approval from him. And lastly, we've got to use up that really sad wrinkly apple that was in our fruit jar. I'm going to be making an apple cinnamon oatmeal, and in order to make this apple a little bit less sad, we're going to peel off the peels, and once you get that off, really the apple looks fine inside. It's a little bit softer and you wouldn't want to eat it fresh, but it's going to be perfect for oatmeal. It's gonna be soft anyway once it's cooked up, so nobody will ever know the difference. So I'm just gonna dice this up, and then in a pan I have some butter melted, and I'm gonna add in those diced apples along with a couple of tablespoons of brown sugar. And I'm gonna really let these fry off and caramelize so that it gets a really nice deep sweet flavor. And once those have started to brown, I'm going to add in my oats. I have steel cut oats here, which are my favorite kind of oats. And I bought a huge bag of these from Azure last time we ordered, so we have plenty of these to use up. And once I let those toast off in the butter and that apple flavor for a little bit, I'm gonna add a few pinches of salt and 4 parts of water. And then, of course, you have to have cinnamon because this is going to be apple cinnamon oatmeal. And we're just going to let this boil until it is completely cooked and all that liquid has absorbed, which is going to take about 25 minutes. Steel cut oats do take a pretty long time to cook, much longer than quick oats or old-fashioned oats, but I think it is so worth it because the texture when they are done is so nice. They don't just turn to complete mush, they still have a really nice like toothsome chew to them. This is just like a really nice hearty breakfast. It's a very humble one, but a great one to be able to use up a lot of things in your pantry. Not only do you have your oats, but you can also top it with lots of nuts and seeds, some dried fruit. You can also put in like fruit preserves or jam, and it's just a really nice warming breakfast for the winter. So that's it for this video of pantry breakfast and snacks. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you're going to try out any of these recipes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.